Hi everyone, Major Frenchy. Welcome to part 2 of the how to connect hardware onto virtual pinball. The previous video was the theory, so I showed you a diagram. If you haven't seen the video, there's something that's going to pop right now on the screen. You can look the first video, or you can click the link in the video description and it will bring you to the first video. Today what we're going to do is we are going to go in the workshop and I'm going to show you how to connect not all the devices because a lot of them are similar. But I'm going to show you a good sample of connections, how we connect the power supply and how we connect it to the Rig Master. Stay tuned. Here's a quick overview of what I'm going to demonstrate the connections on, and it'll give you a really good idea on how everything is connected. Those are my 24 volt thunderclaps. They're from Lab Arcades, and they sound real good. And you can see the two screw terminals where you connect the positive and the negative. Shaker motor, and this is not the one I'm going to use in the cab, but it's easy to use this one. And these are the actual 12 volt lights, and they're not strobe, they just light up. And those are my addressable LEDs. They're 144 LEDs per meter. These are the power supply I'm going to use. I have a 5, a 12 and a 24 volt power supply. The 24 volt power supply is 20 amps, and that's going to be plenty for thunderclaps. This is the 5 volts for the addressable LED, 60 amps, and this is the 12 volt, and we have 30 amps. Each one of them has an extension cord that we've chopped the female portion, and I've actually crimped some spade connectors, one for the ground, one for the live, and one for the neutral. So this is the live. It's going on the right side where the L, you can see that's for the live. This is the neutral, the white one is going to go in the middle. And the ground is the last one with the circle is going to go here. We're going to tighten that up. Let's try to plug it in. Now we can see the green light. The power now is on. I'm going to replicate the process for the other two power supplies. Let's plug them in. And all green lights are on. Now we're going to connect the negative voltage from the power supply to a central terminal block using regular 18 gauge wire. This is the fork connector that we're going to put on the terminal block. We're going to run a wire from the 12 volt power supply, and this is the ground of the power supply. We're going to run it all the way to this ground terminal block. I'm going to do the same for the 24 volt power supply, and we're going to run the ground to the terminal block. Now we're going to take care of the power, so the positive. And I'm going to connect a wire from the V plus of the 12 volt power supply, and we're going to run it to its own 12 volt terminal block that we're going to use for 12 volt power, positive. And we're going to do the same thing for the 24 volt positive. So we're going to run a wire from the 24 V plus of the 24 volt power supply and we're going to screw it on the 24 volt plus terminal block that we've just installed. Now our outputs next to it are going to be 24 volt positive outputs. Now I'm going to test the voltage. So I've got the ground on the ground board, and I'm going to touch the 24 volt terminal block, and it shows 24 volts. Also, I'm testing the 5 volts, and the 12 volt was exactly the same. Now we need to connect the 12 volts and the ground onto the Rig Master. So let's just start with the ground and the 12 volt blocks. This is where the power is going to come from. So I'm going to attach a wire to the 12 volt plus of the Rig Master on the left side, and I'm going to connect it to the 12 volt terminal block that we connected the 12 volt power supply. Now we're going to connect another wire to the ground terminal on the Rig Master, and I'm going to run it on the ground terminal block. The additional ground toys terminal on the Rig Master, you can connect them to the ground. These are additional wires just to balance the load on the board if you have a lot of toys, but they're not necessary. The Rig Master is connected with the power. Let's flick the switch and test it. We can see a blue light. That means that it's powered up properly. Now we're going to connect the mollusk, which is the expansion board. I'm going to connect 12 and ground to it. And those two wires, they're coming from the 12 volt terminal block and the central ground, just like any other boards. The must light, we're going to power it up as well. These are for our 5 flasher bar and the strobe. So I'm running a 12 volt wire, and it's going, guess where? To the 12 volt terminal block right here. We're running a ground on that board, and guess where the ground is going? And let's power up all these boards, and we can see the lights are all blue, meaning that the boards are powered up properly. Now we have the must light. We need to connect it to the mollusk. So in order to do this, we need to actually wire the matching ports from one board to the next one. That's fairly simple. And here we are. Now we need to connect the mollusk to the Rig Master. So all we need to do is those 7 pins need to be connected from both devices. They have matching port names, so it is fairly simple to connect. These are the 12 volts RGB lights from Arno's, and this is the 4-threaded wire I'm going to use. Fairly simple. You just insert the wire from the back and just apply a little bit of solder to complete the circuit. There we go. We got a nice clean connection. And now what we can do is we can test these wires. Power supply, 12 volts. I'm going to connect a positive lead to the 12 volt, and I'm going to touch each color separately to test them. Perfect. It's working. Now all we got to do is do it 5 times. This is the thunderclap. We have the 24 volt positive going to the 24 volt terminal block that we've installed, and the ground of the thunderclap will go to the Rig Master, and we've selected port 16 here, so it's plugged here, and I added a 2 amp fuse for that thunderclap. This is the 12 volt light. This one's going to connect on the must light port where it says 12 volt and STR. This is the 5 LED that we've just installed, and it's going to be going on the must light 12 volt BGR. And the other end goes to the mollusk, and the other end of the mollusk, data in, is going to the Rig Master, as I've shown you before. The shaker motor, it's working on 12 volts. Don't forget the diode. And this is the 12 volt terminal block. And the ground of the shaker will go to port 15 on the Rig Master. And I'm adding a 2 amp fuse. Now I got a beacon that's connected to 12 volt power block right here, and I've got the negative going to port number 13. So let's try that. Got a fuse in here. I'm going to test the beacon. Yep, beacon is 12 volts, so it's plugged exactly like any other device. Shaker motor. Oh, that can go crazy. That's our 24 volt thunderclap. Take care of the addressable LEDs. We have a 5 volt power supply, so I got some kind of splitter here, so that's my 5 volt positive going out. And the red, that's going to the addressable LEDs. See the harness? So the red, and then this is the ground. So the V minus on the 5 volt power supply, I got a splitter here, and it's going to be the white wire. So that's going to connect on the LED strip. And the middle wire, the green one, goes to the Pinmos on one of the ports. Connect via USB, and it should be set. Let's try it in the dark. There you go. Success. Now we're going to connect the buttons on the Rig Master. So I'm going to need a standalone terminal block just for the buttons, and this is where I'm going to connect it. And this is a typical push button, and this one is a backlit button, so I'm going to show you 2 different examples. Now I'm going to unscrew the terminal for the KL ground, and I'm going to run a wire right onto the terminal block right here. And all buttons ground are going to connect to this terminal block. This is the button ground, and then we're going to connect it to the terminal block. So clipping the wire here, and the other end is going right on the screw terminal. The other wire, which is the pin on the side, is the signal. So this one is going to go onto the Rig Master button input. And this one we're gonna pick the, let's say, exit. So let's just connect it to the exit button. Now when we're pressing the button, we're gonna see the input in the Pinscape software, and it is already mapped to escape by default because most games exit is escape. We're gonna get into the additional software configuration in the next video. Don't worry about it. This is our backlit start button. I'm going to show you how we light it up. I'm going to skip though the regular button connection. It's exactly like the previous one. We're going to actually wire it to start. So once it's connected like the previous button, it does exactly the same thing. Now it's 1 that gets triggered by default. But now we're going to power it up. The power is the side pins. One is a ground, one is a power. So we're going to connect a wire to one of the pin,
And the other end is going to be the 12 volt terminal block, assuming that it is a 12 volt button. We're going to connect the other side, and we're going to test our button just by touching the central ground. And success. If it does not work, just reverse the polarity of the button connectors. The ground of the button power, though, is not going on the central ground. It's going to go on the PWM port of the Rig Master. It is not working. Do you know why? That's right, we need a fuse. Let's use a 0.2 amp fuse that we're going to put on the Rig Master. We're going to use port 9. We'll drop the fuse in there. And I'm going to click on in the software. And I'm going to use the slider because it's PWM, it can dim. And folks, that's going to be our start button.
Hopefully now you have a good understanding on how to connect hardware onto your controller board. In this case, it's the Rig Master. So if your toys are different than mine, most likely it's going to connect exactly like that. Now, if you have questions, though, feel free to come and ask in the virtual pinball chat. It's on Discord, and the link is in the description below, and people will be more than happy to help you. There is a lot to consider, folks. I mean, I'm trying to kind of give you the headlines of how to do this. There might be the odd occasion where your stuff does not work exactly like mine. It's not an exact science, but hopefully I taught you the principle. And the only thing that I'm actually that I didn't touch on today, that I will touch in future videos, is the surround sound feedback. So when I install them on the actual cabinet, I'm going to spend some time and show you how it is connected. Don't forget, the next video is going to be the software. So I'm going to show you within Pinscape how we configure everything to make it work in our cabinet. Thank you guys for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.